Well, I think, we spend a lot of time talking about all the technicalities of the conventions and all of those sorts of things. And I think what we all really need to remember is at the heart of our discussions, we're talking about individual human beings, we're talking about families, and really our concern about providing protection, our concern about improving lives is not about, anonymous, invisible groups of people, but it's actually people that we know, people that we interact with. So as we think about the applicability of the conventions and so on, as we think about how to implement those things and to make them real, we have to think about the individual human being, and that's what the focus really should be.
The fact that it is important to consider gender issues in policies and programs, and that it's important to collect data as much as possible while they're doing their daily work on migration issues, they should be thinking all the time about collecting this data. I gave a list of issues that they could be thinking of, and I hope that they do it going back to their countries.
I would identify two basic messages. The first one is that knowledge is a key element in order to be in a position to defend your own voice. Mm-hmm. This is the first element. The second one is that once you acquire the right information and data, you are in a position to be empowered and to defend your own voice, in bilateral negotiations as applied to the so-called management of international migration, whether this management takes place at a bilateral level or multilateral level.
I think the message is there is to underline that when we talk about labour migration, that we are really dealing with human beings first and foremost, and that even though there are other actors that are clearly interested and stakeholders in the process of labour migration, there are governments and social partners, employers, trade unions and diaspora organisations, etc., that migrant workers, whether they're men or women, are clearly at the heart of what are our concerns. And so the importance of standards, the fact that ILO over many years has set out a number of standards which unfortunately today are perhaps not as widely accepted as they could be. They nonetheless set the benchmark for what needs to be done in terms of ensuring that migration occurs in an equitable and a fair way, and that the rights of migrant workers are adequately protected. And similarly in the development of labour migration policies to ensure that migrant workers are at the heart of those policies.
I spoke today about the global governance of international migration. I suppose there are two main messages that I hope that participants will leave with. One is I think we need a better global governance arrangement for international migration. There are protection gaps, there are new dynamics, and the current institutional framework simply doesn't work. So we need to make changes. But the second message is those changes are going to be very hard to make. I think we shouldn't be naive about them. There are some very, very important obstacles, and perhaps the most important obstacle is sovereignty. States see migration as directly linked with sovereign affairs, and they're very unwilling to give up control over those sovereign affairs. So we need better migration governance, but I think we've got a long way to go.
I think, a lot of my work is about doing research and doing policy work and so on. And it's really good for me to interact with people who are practitioners on the ground, who really understand what it is that's going on. So that when I think about a particular policy option, or when I think about a particular idea, that they remind me that sometimes my ideas are not that practical, and I think it's really useful to engage and say, well, what do you think about this? And they say, I don't think that will work in my context. So I think the opportunity to interact with people who are responsible for actually doing the things that I suggest they do is a really valuable learning experience, because it sometimes helps me to think about what I suggest in a much more practical way.
I would say, first of all, the need for clear information which we can provide to them, but also which we can learn from them, because I learned quite a great deal interacting with the participants from many countries. And the second point is, I think that this is a unique place where people can not only interact among themselves in order to learn, their respective experiences as applied to labour migration issues, but also it is a unique place where you can really bring forward a new debate, on these issues.
There is a lot to learn from the participants. After all, the participants in many cases in this academy are experts themselves. They work at sometimes very high levels in their organizations, whether it's in government or in social partner organizations, etc. And there is a lot to learn from them. But at the same time, having said that, one of the other experiences that I've had during the course of this academy is to see how, when we're discussing the governance of labour migration, protection, the links between migration and development, that really very similar issues arise regardless of what part of the world we're discussing. And so there are common issues, common concerns, which we find, and in fact, if anything, sometimes we find some of the differences are not really all that different. And
I was quite impressed actually by the questions that have been raised in several sessions that I've attended, and it does make sense to bring together people from different work, not only from the government but also from academic, from NGOs and from trade unions. I think that we should sustain that kind of multi-party, partite interaction. It's good. Certainly, if I compare this course with many other similar workshops and courses we have organized in the past, it is perhaps a great deal more ambitious, with many more topics than most.
The one thing that struck me this morning was that there were several NGOs, and the NGOs have become perhaps the most important non-governmental actor by definition. They're not governmental, but in addition to NGOs, there used to be trade unions who would play a very important role in securing the rights of migrant workers. That is perhaps less the case today than it was in the past. Today it appears to me that NGOs have taken over that role, and with lots of enthusiasm, few means, perform it very well and very effectively, and I wish them good luck.
I suppose two things. I only had a very brief interaction with the participants, but two things struck me. Firstly, the wide range of countries from which they came from and the wide range of backgrounds. And so just listening to people from Malaysia and Zimbabwe and so on and so forth immediately taught me about the places from which they came from. You have a wide range of participants, both government and NGOs and trade unions, and so it's interesting for me to get those perspectives too. And I quite liked the challenging way in which they asked questions. They thought about what I'd said, they perhaps had done some reading in advance, and they asked some challenging critical questions, and I found that very rewarding.